Welcome to Concordia Church Online.
Hi, I'm Richard, Concordia's pastor. You know, I've been thinking about life in general this week and how certain things just really kind of fill you up, right? I mean, you're tired, you're weary, you're worn out, and then it's like, well, you get a good night's sleep, and that just kind of fills your cup. And maybe you get a vacation, and it just kind of fills your cup, or you just get a day away and it fills your cup, or maybe somebody notices something that you've done and compliments you on that, and again it fills your cup, or they just tell you something that makes you feel really good. And you know, your cup gets filled and you just feel a little better. Now here's the problem. Our cup that we're carrying around, it's not like this one. Our cups like this one. Full of holes, right? And you can try to drink, but you just can't get it fast enough. And the things that would restore us, they just kind of run right through us. And as tired and exhausted and as thirsty as we were before, because we can't get it fast enough, we're just still tired and thirsty and exhausted. And you know, sometimes life does that to us. Sometimes the pace of life does that to us. Sometimes both of them do it to us. And you know, sometimes it's even like we're poking holes in our own cup. And you're like, well, why would we do that? Well, that's silly. We're sheep, remember? And sheep are silly, smelly, and stupid, and sheep don't really learn. And so we got things like, you know, COVID gave us a chance during the COVID year to sort of evaluate the pace of the life that we're running at. But now that things are opening up again, for some people, life's pace is just as frenetic as it was before, maybe even more so, as you're like trying to cram 2 or 3 years of activities into the space of 1 year and poking a hole in the cup. Or we buy another thing that we can't afford and poke a hole in the cup. Or we've learned what we shouldn't say, but we just say that thing out loud that is better left unsaid, and we poke another hole in the cup. Or we keep chasing personal happiness. Now, and happiness isn't a bad thing, but making that our ultimate goal and chasing personal happiness, it's really poking another hole in the cup, because we find out that we're never quite satisfied, and so we're never really happy. And all that stuff we're after, it just runs right through, and we're exhausted. Physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. And even if we're not doing it to ourselves, even if we're not poking a hole in our own cup, you know, life has a way of doing that too. If COVID 2020 taught us anything, it's that. And I've been hearing lots of stories this year of people who are just running around with a leaky cup and running on empty. And I got to tell you, without going into a whole lot of detail, our family, the Schmidt family, we're one of those. What about you? I mean, stop and think about this for a minute. Where's your cup leaking right now? And how are those holes getting there? All right, take a moment to reflect on that and talk about it if you're watching or listening with somebody else. So what do we do about that leaky cup? I mean, it seems like we're either poking holes in it ourselves and can't seem to stop, or life's poking holes in it, or we're trying to plug the leaks ourselves and it doesn't really seem to be working, and that to me all seems like a sort of a no-win scenario. Here's an alternative. Jesus doesn't just plug the holes. All right, Jesus actually gives us a brand new cup. A cup with no holes in it to begin with, and a cup that resists the holes that are trying to be poked in it, which is, if we hold on to that cup, it's like our cup's going to actually overflow, like David tells us at the end of this psalm, and that's because God just keeps pouring into us. Now here's how David describes that pouring into in the sentences we're going to look at today. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Let me start with that green pastures image. Because green pastures are like the literally new fresh grass. It's the best, the tastiest, the most nutritious pasture that a sheep can have, and that's where the shepherd's leading. But as I read about sheep, here's the problem with sheep. They tend to settle. Right? From what I've read, sheep tend to settle for the first thing that they run across that looks like food, and it looks like it might even possibly satisfy them, even if it really won't. I think we do that too, right? In our never-ending search for happiness and self-fulfillment, or in our more immediate trying to just plug the holes that we can find something that can work, and we settle. And settling is at best, well, it's a temporary solution, isn't it? Settling doesn't satisfy for long. Settling doesn't fill us the way that the best pasture does. Settling doesn't stop the leaking for long either. And as a result, we end up being, well, just as tired and exhausted as we were before we settled, and maybe even a little more frustrated because we thought we were doing something that was going to plug the holes or fill us up, and we found out that settling didn't, and it leaves us frustrated. And we also sometimes settle for stuff that, well, it kind of looks good enough for now, but it's really not. I think that's what comes through in David's "He leads me beside still waters" image. Now still waters are the literally quiet waters, peaceful waters, deep waters, fresh waters that are the best and the most renewing and fulfilling for the sheep. But again, here's the thing about sheep. They tend to settle. And from what I've read, when sheep get thirsty, they just start looking around for water, and the first thing that looks like it might do, if they're not led to good waters, they're just going to start drinking it. And so they have a tendency to lap up puddles that have all sorts of parasites and other pollution in it, which doesn't always cause an immediate problem. And maybe the sheep are thinking, hey, that's all right. That I finally solved one myself without the shepherd. Until later, when the parasites kick in, and then that's like, ouch, right? That's a big hurt. And they're in a lot of pain, and maybe that's happened to you. Maybe we've kind of done the same thing sometimes. You're parched and you see water, something that you think's gonna fill you up, and you're thirsty, and it doesn't look bad, and it doesn't seem like there's really anything wrong with it. And maybe somebody warns you about that, but you're like, no, it looks good, and you're thirsty, and it's right in front of me, so you drink. I mean, why not? What could it hurt? I can't see where it's going to cause any harm. There's lots of other things in our world that are like that, aren't there? So this water that almost everybody seems to be drinking, and so because everybody seems to be drinking it, we think it must be good, and otherwise, why would they be drinking it too? It doesn't seem to be harming them, so it's not going to harm me, and so we drink too. That's what sheep do. Sheep follow other sheep. But that settling doesn't really have a good end. Right? If you're settling for food that's not really food, it doesn't fill you up and it's not nutritious. And if you're settling for water that's polluted or it's got parasites, remember, it's not always apparent that the water's bad at the beginning. When you drink, the pain comes later. I mean, stop and think about that for a minute. Where are you settling right now? And where are you settling spiritually? And what has settling done for you? Okay, when we settle, what we're thinking is, well, this is the best I can do. Or this is the best it's going to be. Or this is the best I'm going to feel. Or this is the best I can do for now. Question, doesn't God want to lead you to better pastures? To purer water? To things that will fill you and sustain you and strengthen you? To things that are going to refresh you and renew you and restore you? And doesn't he want you to stay there for a while so that you can just linger and fill up? All right, he's the good shepherd, so that's what his agenda is. The problem is that not only do sheep have a tendency to settle, sheep also, from what I've read, have a tendency to be restless, which means they have a pretty hard time lying down and taking it all in. Now, here's what I learned from reading about sheep. Number one, that sheep are easily frightened and easily panicked. They're just timid creatures. I've read stuff about how sheep can get frightened just by a jackrabbit jumping out from behind a bush, and then one sheep runs off and a whole bunch of other ones follow them. They're just scared, timid creatures. Second thing I read about sheep is they have a tendency to kind of butt heads with each other because they're just so jealous of position in the flock. So an older sheep might see a younger one just contentedly off by itself, not causing anybody any problems or any harm, just eating or resting, and that older sheep will run over and kind of butt it and try to push it out of the way and say, no, this is my spot, to show its spot in the flock. Third thing I read about sheep is they're always having to deal with pests, annoying things like flies and parasites. And then the fourth thing I've read about sheep is they're just obsessed with filling their stomachs. They are so obsessed with finding food. As long as they feel hungry, they're not going to rest. They're going to keep searching for food until they find it. They won't lie down and rest, period. And actually, from what I've read about sheep, all four of those things have to be satisfied to a significant degree before they will lie down and rest. So to lie down, sheep need to feel free from fear, free from tension, free from aggravation, and free from hunger. And if you think about our lives, maybe we need to have see some of those same things. I mean, being sheep, they can't solve those issues on their own, and neither can we. Fear, tension, aggravation, hunger for that, either for stuff or for that elusive pursuit of happiness, it just seems to leave us restless all the time. So what is it that calms us down? What is it that calms the sheep so they can lie down? From what I've read, it's something this simple. It's the visible presence of the shepherd. The sheep see the shepherd, and suddenly it's like, okay, I see the shepherd, and I know I'm going to be protected from any danger because I've seen the shepherd do that before. And I see the shepherd. And I know if there's somebody that's pushing their way around the flock, the shepherd's going to take care of that pusher. And I see the shepherd. And I know that if I'm itching or in pain from one of these pests, that the shepherd's going to come and take care of me. And I see the shepherd. And I know that the shepherd's going to lead me to good pastures and help me get the best food that I can find. And the sheep know that because they've experienced that. All right, they've experienced it. They see the shepherd and they feel safe and secure and content. They figure the shepherd's going to do what the shepherd has always done. Which is the point, I think, that David is trying to make here about Jesus. What we translate, "He makes me to lie down in green pastures," literally reads, "He causes me to lie down in green pastures." Now see the difference? It's a subtle one, but it's an important one. Make me lie down almost gives the impression that God's forcing us to lie down, and almost like he's holding us there. Jesus causes me to lie down means I'm going to lie down on my own because I see him. Jesus causes me to lie down in green pastures because his very presence calms me. I see him, and I feel safe and secure. Right? I see him, and the things that were bothering me don't bother me quite as much anymore as they did, because I figure, well, Jesus is going to be who he's always been, and he's going to do what he's always done, and he's going to treat me like he always has, and that takes care of that stuff. He's going to take care of that stuff, and he's going to lead me to the places where my cup can get filled. I see Jesus, and I'm content. I'm still dealing with this stuff, but I see that Jesus is dealing with that stuff better than I can. And I stop running, and I start resting. And lying down and following where he leads and staying there so that I can find the restoration that I need. So I want you to reflect on this. When you're tired and scared, what can you do to see Jesus? And what are you going to do about that this week? We've been using the word restoration a few times, and it comes from the last phrase in what we're looking at today that David wrote. He restores my soul. Now, when David wrote, he restores my soul, quite literally, that's saying he causes my soul to turn back. And that makes this phrase a grace phrase, a life-giving phrase, a forgiveness word. And we need that because, like real life sheep, we're still having those wandering tendencies. And we get bored with the same old menu, and we look for something different and more exciting, and we see greener pastures over there, and so we wander off and forget that what those greener pastures made them greener was probably a pile of manure, right? And unfortunately, we're doing that all the time, right? Same sort of thing happens to sheep too. And this phrase, he turns my soul back, speaks directly to that, because Here's from what I've read about sheep, what happens sometimes when the sheep are off wandering. Sometimes they get turned over. They get turned over completely on their back, and then they can't get up again. Fat sheep and sheep with too much wool are particularly seemingly susceptible to that. But here's what happens. The sheep kind of wander off, and in their wandering, they're looking for a really comfortable spot. And they find that in a little depression, a little hollow in the land, a little soft spot. And then they lie down because it's comfortable, and they start moving around, and it feels, it's more comfortable. But then their equilibrium starts to shift, especially if they're fat or got too much wool, and they get completely turned over, and then they're stuck. they can't turn back over again. And their feet are just stuck in the air and they're like flailing around a little bit, and it would be comical if it wouldn't be so serious. See, because sheep in that condition, turned over, where they can't get back up, they're in real trouble. I mean, either their insides are going to get all messed up, or predators are going to see that and they're going to come and get them. And a sheep that stays turned over too long, well, it's probably going to die. And what does the shepherd do? What does the shepherd do about that when the sheep's got into trouble? I mean, I think that's really important that we understand that, because a lot of people get the impression of God that when we fall, that God gets fed up and disgusted and says, why are they wandering off again? He gets fed up and even furious with us, and maybe even kicks us when we're down and probably yells out, hey, serves you right, get out of this yourself. Now, I know there are times that I've thought about people that way, but God's not like that. All right? And that's what David wants us to see here. What's God like? Well, God's like the shepherd whose eyes are constantly watching over the flock and looking for anyone that's missing. And then as he sees that one's missing, he figures it wandered off. And one of the things he knows is that when sheep wander off, they tend to get turned over. And so he starts looking really intensely, and he goes out searching for the one, and he looks in those places where he knows that they're likely to get turned over, and then he's still looking around and keeps searching, and when he sees them, he runs out to restore the sheep, to turn it back over. And when he gets there, he doesn't berate the sheep. He just helps the sheep. And I think David wants us to see God's like that. God's like that, searching and running after and restoring sheep that have gotten into a mess. He doesn't want them to get in that mess in the first place, but when they do, he loves them so much that when they're in a mess, he wants to help them get back turned around. He cares more about restoring them than anything else. Now, I ran across our description of a shepherd, how a shepherd did that, and I want to read it to you because I think it gives you a good picture of what David wants us to see about what God's like in this image of restoring the sheep. Here's what he wrote. I would spend hours searching for a single sheep that was missing. Then more often than not, I'd see it at a distance, down on its back, lying helpless. At once I would start to run toward it, hurrying as fast as I could, for every minute was critical. Within me was a mingled sense of fear and joy. Fear that it might be too late, joy that it was found at all. As soon as I reached it, my very first impulse was to pick it up tenderly. I would roll the sheep over on its side. It would relieve the pressure of the gases in the rumen. If she'd been down for long, I would have to lift her onto her feet. In straddling the sheep with my legs, I would hold her erect, rubbing her limbs to restore the circulation to her legs. This often took quite a little time. When the sheep started to walk again, she often just stumbled, staggered, and collapsed in a heap once more. All the time I worked in the sheep, I would gently talk to it. When are you going to learn to stand on your own feet? I'm glad I found you in time. Little by little, the sheep would regain its equilibrium. It would start to walk steadily and surely. By and by, it would dash away to rejoin the others, set free from its fears and frustrations, given another chance to live a little longer. Let's take a moment to think about this. How does that image of a shepherd searching for and running to restore a sheep that's been turned over, how does that give you a picture of what God is like? And what's appealing to you about that picture right now? God restores. Right? That's the big point of this section of David's psalm. And that ought to give you confidence, I think. It sure gives me confidence. Gives you confidence, especially if you've gotten yourself into an uncomfortable or a messy situation. See, we got confidence because if that's you, in one of those uncomfortable, sticky situations, you can understand that God has a heart for you. That God has a concern and compassion for people who've gotten themselves turned upside down, and for people who are sick from drinking polluted water, or for people who are famished because what they've been trying to eat just isn't filling and satisfying. Guys, God comes quickly. If you're in that situation, He comes quickly and quietly and gently and reassuringly to restore me. To restore me no matter where or when or how I might be turned upside down. That's really good news. And so is this. If your feet are upright, but you're so bothered by all the things going on around you that you really can't rest, that you're so restless that you just can't stay there long enough to eat and drink deeply, look up again and look for your shepherd. Look and see Jesus. Because seeing your shepherd, it has a way of calming you down. Calming you down, and so that you can linger in those places that He's leading you to, and you can get filled up again. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Pray with me.